Man, our retreat AV team, they're just amazing, right? So once again, thank you everyone, and just to remind you to all the parents, at our church, the way we're a little bit different than other churches where if you want your children to have a full experience on Sunday, our program starts from 10 o'clock. So if you just come to service at 12 o'clock and you bring your kids, they will get to participate and worship God with the group. But our Bible studies and all the other activities actually start at 10 o'clock. And that's just the setup that we have in partnership with our Korean congregation. So just keep that in mind. So I'm sure the kids who went to the retreat, they will love to socialize, and they get to be in their Bible classes with their peers. So yeah, if you want to have your kids just experience a full aspect of all the children's ministry, 10 o'clock is the time to bring them. I'm sure our teachers will love to get to know them more during that time as well. So once again, thank you. And those of you who couldn't send your kids, make sure you send them, because they really missed out. And I'm sure we're going to have many more retreats. So I would love to see more kids and more counselors get involved. With that, so today, as I told you, we're going to start our gospel project series once again. We're back to Genesis. We just finished Revelation the past Sunday, so we're back to Genesis. And what's good is that this actually aligns with our Bible reading. So I encourage you once again to read the Bible, and let's do it together as a church. So open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1. And I'll talk about chapter 1 and 2, and I'll just read a couple verses here and there. So today, what I want to focus on is one, that God is the creator. That God is a creator, and that He created us with clear identity and purpose. And I'll do that throughout chapters 1 and 2. So if you look at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, you might be kind of confused, because Genesis chapter 1 tells the whole account. And then when you get to chapter 2, you're like, is this a different account of creation? Does this contradict what chapter 1 actually talks about? The truth is, it doesn't. You can see chapter 1 of Genesis as like a bird's eye view of the creation story. Like you're kind of looking at it from a general sense, overall story. And when you get to chapter 2, it's more detailed story, specifically focused on how Adam and Eve came about. So that's how you should understand chapters 1 and 2 and see it as a whole story, not as a separate accounts. So with that, let me just read Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and then we'll get started with the message. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It is no accident that God is the subject of the very first sentence of the Bible. And I want us to kind of dwell on this for a little bit, because just by saying this, you will probably get into a lot of arguments with people in this world. Not only that He's mentioned as a subject of the first sentence of the Bible, but it's actually repeated over 40 times in the first chapter and the second chapter alone. And some of the phrases that you will come to is God said, God called, God made, God said, God blessed, God finished, God rested, God formed, God breathed, God planted, He placed, He warned, He gave, and He brought. God is the one doing everything in this creation story. Nothing came out of existence without God's doing. It was not an accident. It wasn't by chance that this creation, this world came about. God was behind all this wonderful work of creation. Psalms chapter 19 verse 1 says this about the creation. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. As we look around, as we enjoy the snow, as we look at beautiful sunset, as we look at the galaxies, whatnot, we have to recognize the beauty that lies behind the actual things that we see, the works of His hands. Romans chapter 1, verse 20 in New Living Translation phrases it this way. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see His invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. Bible makes it very clear. There are ways for people to know God. Again, this is just recognizing God, not knowing Him personally, but God's creation declares who He is. We can see His invisible qualities in the things that we see in this world. And as God created the world, common phrase that we see again and again and again in chapters 1 and 2 is what? God saw that it was good. God saw that it was good. I want us to take a moment to appreciate the goodness of God's creation. Consider the vastness and the harmony and the perfect order of how everything just works together. I'm not a scientist. I was never good at science. I don't know anything about the galaxies or space. I don't care as much as some of you do who study that kind of stuff. But it still amazes me to think that the heavens and the earth and the universe and the galaxies all somehow work together in perfect order. Because if one thing goes wrong, you know it's going to be a major disaster. But God somehow designed everything to work together in perfect order. And we need to take a moment to appreciate what God has done. Each day, after God created certain things, Bible says God saw what He created, as if He was observing and assessing carefully to see whether the created things align well with His intended design that He had in mind. Just like a designer or architect will make sure that whatever is built is according to the design they put out. Perhaps God was doing that every single day. And after God saw carefully, He called it good, giving a thumbs up of approval and satisfaction of how everything turned out to be. And that includes all of us too, because we are God's creation. So with that, I want you to turn to your neighbor and look at them carefully as God saw His creation and say, wow, you are good. I see people not looking at each other. Say, you are perfect. All right, okay. Some of you are like, I don't know about perfect here. Maybe you're close to perfect, but I don't care what you see, because when God sees you, you are perfect, okay? So those of you who doubt your goodness, all joking aside, when God sees us, God will say the same thing. Not only good, but did you know, after God created Adam and Eve, He said, very good, very good. So you are perfect. Listen to your mom. She's the wisest one. To any mom, your children, they're perfect, right? The world God created was inherently good, as everything He had created reflected His own goodness and character. Do you see that in this world? As you look around the world, we're living in a fallen world, okay? But talk about the world as God had designed. At least first 2 chapters before the fall comes in, everything God created was inherently good. And then we kind of mess it up in many ways. But this world was created to reflect God, His own goodness, His character, so that everywhere we turn, as we look at each other, we're supposed to say, wow, I see God in you, in the sun, in the stars, in the beautiful creation that we see as we travel around the world. And the Bible says that God took the earth, which was formless, and as a creator, He formed earth into a beautiful and magnificent creation. I think whenever I think about the creation story, I think about our elder Sunny. As an artist, I think she would appreciate the creation story a lot more than me because I'm not the artistic. That God in his mind had this intelligent and wonderful design, and that he took a canvas called earth and he started to design things. Whatever he had in mind just came into being as he spoke the earth into life. God took the earth that was empty, as the Bible says, and he filled it with all kinds of vegetation, trees that bear fruit, living creatures that swim in the water, birds that fly across the sky, the wild animals and the creatures that move along the ground. And this is the account of the Genesis chapter 1, right? And most importantly, God created mankind in his own image and likeness and told us to do what? To multiply and fill the earth. So God filled this earth with beautiful creations. So we have to take a moment and say, how amazing is our God? And did you know in the same way, this same Creator God is moving and working in our lives today to bring renewal in our faith, in our life, to fill our empty hearts and minds with life once again. So many of us, we struggle to fill this void in our hearts and our minds. We wonder, what is our purpose on earth? Every time we go to work, you know and I know, oftentimes we sit there, is this what I'm supposed to do? Is there more to life than just running through this busyness of life? And God, the same God who filled the earth that was empty and void, God is able to fill our hearts and our minds and with our lives. And He'll breathe in life into those things. And God who formed the earth into His existence is molding and shaping our lives every single day. Have you heard the phrase, God is our potter? One thing I always wanted to do when I first came to America, I saw people holding pottery things, and because I didn't know much, I didn't get to take any classes, but I would love to take those classes and have an experience to create something with the clay. It just looks so fun. And that's what potter does, right? In Jeremiah chapter 18, verses 1 through 5, they refer to God as the potter, and this is what it says. This is the word that came from Jeremiah from the Lord. Go down to the potter's house, and there I will give you a message. So I went down to the potter's house, and I saw him working at the wheel. But the pot he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hands. So the potter formed it into another pot, shaping as it seemed best to him. Then the word of the Lord came to me. He said, can I not do with you, Israel, as this potter does? Like clay in the hand of the potter, so are you in my hand, Israel. God is our potter, and He has the power to create, to shape, and even reshape our lives according to His will. Even when we face challenges or make mistakes. And we should take comfort in that. Even when we mess up. Just like when a potter messes up, hey, redo it. God will shape us as it seems best to Him. Creation story tells us that God not only created and worked hard, but He actually rested on the seventh day. He rested because He was finished, not because He was tired. I actually spoke on this during our early morning prayer this week, so I'm not going to go into detail of what I shared. But the Bible is very clear that He completed all His work and He rested on the seventh day. But what I want to introduce here, without going into too much detail, is the rhythm of life. healthy rhythm of life that we need to learn to apply in our own lives. Work and rest. You and I know a command to rest is in the Bible. We often call it keeping the Sabbath. This does not mean that we're obligated to observe Sabbath in the sense of the Old Testament, where we drop everything, we can't even move a finger. According to the journey curriculum that we go through in our discipleship at our church, the author wrote this, and I thought it was very insightful to understand what it means to rest and observe Sabbath in our lives, to implement a healthy rhythm of life. I'll just read that for you here. Hebrew meaning of Sabbath carries more meaning than rest or ceasing. It means to reflect, evaluate. God instituted the pattern of one Sabbath day in 7 to give us both physical rest and an opportunity to think about our lives and work, and to interpret these in the context of His rule and reign over us. The Sabbath allows us to ponder how we work, our relationships, our money, achievements, our failures and hobbies and leisure, how all these things fit into the bigger picture of God's eternal purpose in our lives. So if someone asks me, is it really important for us to keep Sabbath? I'll say yes. Not because we need to come to church. I'm not talking about legalistic sense of keeping the Sabbath. But once again, going back to what I just shared, it's a time that God instituted to help us reflect why we do things and why we live, and to see things in a grand picture of eternal perspective in our lives. So let me ask you this. How often do you take a moment to think about your life? How God formed you to be, to live in this world? And I shared last week that we're so busy. We're constantly running around. Our schedules are packed. But oftentimes it's our doing. We're the ones packing it in. We're the ones signing up for all our kids' activities. How about we institute or implement a lifestyle where we take moments multiple times throughout the day, not just on Sunday, to reflect upon God's glory, God's vision for our lives, and also apply that into our children and those around us. If we do that, I think a lot will change. And we know one of the highlights of God's creation has to be the mankind. And it says in verse 26, 27, chapter 1, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. Brothers and sisters, we are set apart from other created things. The word image here, in the original word used here, has the meaning of something that's carved out or cut out, like a statue or an idol. It's kind of strange, right? But that's what the original word means, the image. Which means mankind is a statue of God, a visible representation of the invisible God. Adam was created to resemble and reflect who God is. You and I are created with the same purpose. We are like statue of God. Not in a way that people will come and worship us and bow down to us, but in the sense that we understand whatever statue that people put up, that statue is supposed to represent something, to point to someone or something. And we are created in the image of God. Every time people see us, they're supposed to see God and His reflection in us. And in every aspect of our lives, including how we work, how we eat, how we relate to one another. John Mark Comer, the author of the book that I recommended, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, he said this about being created in the image of God. To be made in the image of God means that we are ripe with potential. We are like God. We were created to image His behavior, to rule like He does, to gather up the raw materials of our planet and reshape them into a world for human beings to flourish and thrive. If you struggle to find purpose in your life, struggle to find motivation for your work, there's actually another book that I'll recommend called Garden City, written by the same author. I started to listen to it. The focus of this book, he actually presents a theology of work, emphasizing that what you do really matters to God. Oftentimes, we emphasize who we are supposed to be, but he actually writes about what you do in terms of your work, how that matters to God's kingdom. So if you're interested and if you want to find more motivation in your work, that's another book that I'll recommend you to look into. So we are created in God's image and in His likeness. And that gives us identity, right? Since we are created in His likeness, we possess the qualities like intellect, free will, and the capacity to love. Unlike animals and other created things, we're moral and spiritual beings. I chuckle because oftentimes we treat animals like human beings. People always tell me they understand Korean and English and Spanish. I mean, give me a break. They might understand what you're trying to say and get some sort of inclination and obey you so they can get treated or whatnot. Don't put ourselves in the same level as animals. Because God created us to be so set apart, so different than any other created things in this world. We are the only ones, human beings are the ones who have the moral capacity to judge, to make decisions. And we are the only spiritual beings. Human beings are created with dignity and worth that is set apart as God breathed life into human beings. God's Spirit resides in us. In verse 27, it says, God created male and female. God designed humanity with gender identities as male and female, who are later united to become one flesh through marriage union. When God created Eve out of Adam's rib, Adam's words, when he says, this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, he recognized that she was of the same nature, but yet distinct, as he called her woman. We are created for a purpose. Not only we emphasize identity, but today for the remainder of our time, I do want to emphasize the purpose of our existence. God created us for relationship. I hope we can catch this in verse 28. It says this, and God blessed them and said to them. God blessed His creation, and that's repeated again and again. But this is the only time that God seems to speak to His creation. And I think this is very significant, emphasizing that God created us to commune with Him, to have relationship with Him. God communicated His vision and purpose. I would love to sit in the room and hear what God had to tell Adam. The first words that He spoke to Adam and Eve. God created us for partnership. When God says, have dominion over creation, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, God is calling us to be partners with Him, to reign on God's behalf by upholding the principles of God's nature and His character. We, humans, became co-rulers with God to govern and to take care of God's creation, to establish God's rule and reign on and over the earth. And oftentimes when we talk about dominion or talk about the meaning of subduing something, may give us an impression of forceful control. But God did not mean it in that way. But rather, He meant it for us to manage with care. To have dominion over something is to cultivate it, to make the land productive and life-sustaining. As God called us stewards, to carry on God's work on this earth, which reflect God's character. So let's look into this word dominion a little bit here. The original meaning of this word describes a royal rule or kingship. And how does God expect a king to rule? And you and I know there are many passages you can look at. But here in Psalm chapter 72 is a beautiful prayer of Solomon as he is being installed as a king over God's people. And let me just read this to you to give an idea of how God expects us to rule. Psalm chapter 72 verse 1. Give your love to justice, give your love of justice to the King, O God, and righteousness to the King's Son. Help him judge your people in the right way. Let the poor always be treated fairly. May the mountains yield prosperity for all, and may the hills be fruitful. Help him to defend the poor, to rescue the children of the needy, and to crush their oppressors. May they fear you as long as the sun shines, as long as the moon remains in the sky. May the king's rule be refreshing like spring rain on freshly cut grass, like the showers that water the earth. Skip down to verse 12. He will rescue the poor when they cry to him. He will help the oppressed who have no one to defend them. He feels pity for the weak and the needy, and he will rescue them. He'll redeem them from oppression and violence, for their lives are precious to him. He here is not talking about God, talking about king, earthly king, that God has appointed to rule over the people. He will redeem from oppression, violence, for their lives are precious to him. The dominion that God desires for us is the one that protects the defenseless, the weak, the one that gives justice to the oppressed, and to care for the earth in many different ways. Imagine how different this world would be if we truly exercise dominion according to God's principle and values. The things that we suffer in this world, the things that the leaders of different nations do, the evil intentions of people, those are not the ways that God wants us to exercise dominion over this earth. God created us for work, to work and take care of the garden, as it says in the Genesis passage. And work is not a curse. Let me say that again to be very clear. Work is not cursed from the Lord. Please note that these two chapters actually come before the fall. There's no existence of any curse. And work was given to Adam and Eve to work the garden, to take care of the garden. It's a calling from the beginning. We were created for work. Perhaps that might be kind of depressing to you this morning, but I really hope it's not. Adam's first task of work was to give names to all the animals. God brought these animals right in front of Adam. As the animals passed by him, he worked hard to come up with names for each animal. So much authority, dominion was given to Adam from the creation. And the opportunity to practice that, God brought the animals in front of him as he named each animal by name. God allowed him to exercise the creativity, the quality that we all possess, because we're created in the image of God and his likeness. I love the fact that God has given us the creativity. And Adam exercised that creativity, a God-given nature to come up with different names of the creation. God didn't have to do that. He could have just named every single animal and he could have just told Adam, this is what this is. This is rhino. This is dog. This is cat. Well, for Adam to have the responsibility to exercise that creativity, that tells us that God created us for work and we could enjoy it because it's something that God has given to us. The word work here is the same word used for worship in the Bible. Did you know that? Oftentimes, the work and worship, they use same word. How does this change your attitude about your daily life and the way you view your work? And please, we don't have time to go into this, but if you actually read the book, Garden City, he actually goes into detail about the divide between sacred and secular. Oftentimes, people tell me, people like pastors in the ministry, oh, you are doing God's work, but I'm just doing worldly work. That's not what the Bible says. That's just something that we made up. Whatever you do is godly work. Because God called you to be a designer, to be a counselor, to be a scientist, to be a teacher, to be an IT specialist, to be an HR. Whatever job you have, it's not just a title, but it's a calling from the Lord. Do it accordingly. Do it as a worship to the Lord. Whether you eat or drink, do it unto the Lord, because that brings glory to Him. So I hope today, on this first Sunday, as you look forward to 2025, if you're a student, be diligent in what you do, in your studies, enjoy it. Do it as a worship to the Lord. If you go to work tomorrow, maybe not tomorrow for those of you who get off, do it unto the Lord as a worship. Have the worship team come up. Last thing is we are created for a community. The one time in the creation narrative, God says it's not good. It's not good. And when is that? When He looks at Adam and He points out it's not good for the man to be alone. Adam's greatest need was the company of another human being. Same goes for all of us here. The reason why Sunday worship and gatherings are so important is because we are not created to be alone. The more you try to isolate yourself and to enjoy the aloneness in your life, you're going against God's original intent. So I love what God says. God says, not only I will make someone to help with your loneliness, but I'll make a suitable helper. And let me take some time to explain what that actually means. Because there are a lot of arguments, a lot of different views on this phrase alone, suitable helper. What does that actually mean? In short, this phrase, suitable helper, describes a person who would satisfy what was missing in Adam's life. A companion, unlike the animals, but someone like himself, created in the image of God, and who share the likeness of God. The Hebrew word used here is ezer kenegdo. Ezer translated as helper, which means to rescue, save, or to be strong. When used with kenegdo, which is translated as suitable, it becomes a phrase meaning according to or corresponding to. Let me just explain what that means. Eve was a person who was similar to Adam, a partner who corresponded to him, who was his equal counterpart, not an assistant, not an associate, or someone who is lower in hierarchy. It's not. She wasn't. In the Bible, Esther, again meaning helper, is often used to describe military and divine help, all from position of strength. God is described as Esther, helper in various places. In the New Testament, who is described as a helper? The Holy Spirit, which signifies a strong and reliable helper, often used in the context where someone is in need of significant assistance or rescue. And that's the story of my life. God knew that I needed my wife. And they become united, one flesh. Eve was someone Adam desperately needed in order to accomplish the mission that God had for both of them. Eve's presence was what made Adam's not good to good. But not only good, but very good. Eve's presence was what made Adam's not good, God's creation that was not good at this state, to be very good. She completed God's divine design. And God said it was very good. God saved the best for last. God designed life to be lived in the community from the beginning. We need each other. However, next week in chapter 3, many of you already read chapter 3, you know the story. The very thing that God has established, the community from the get-go, the enemy, the serpent tries to come and separate the community. They start to blame one another. The serpent comes to separate us from God. And he is still doing that even today in the churches. Because his tactic is to divide, to isolate believers, to make them believe that there is no one who can understand them. No one understands me. I just need to figure things out for myself. I don't need other people. But I will respectfully tell you you're wrong. That you don't truly understand how God has designed you. That's why church community is so important. Because we are not complete without one another. So I pray this year, as we continue to think about what we want to focus on this year, I pray that you will think about the importance of community. Being connected with one another. Because that's where you will find yourself thriving in the way that God has designed you, purposed you. Let's all stand. So as we close the service today, let me tell you what kind of community they established in the garden. The last verse in chapter 2 says, Adam and Eve, they were both naked and they felt no shame. And I was thinking about that. What was so important that God had to include that sentence as the last line of the creation? And I was thinking about it, and I thought to myself, how amazing would it be like for community, for relationships to be where we don't have to put up a facade. We don't have to cover ourselves, cover up our shame, our failures, where we can truly be quote unquote naked, be who we are, be vulnerable, and not be ashamed of ourselves. And that is the community that Adam and Eve enjoyed in the Garden of Eden. What about the church today? There's so much judgment going around. It's hard for people to come and be naked, recognize our weaknesses, verbalize our struggles. But what if our church can become this kind of community where we're all naked and we feel no shame? There's true love, there's true honor, there's true unity in that. How freeing that would be. That we don't have to act like we know, we don't have to act like we're more mature, but we can actually embrace one another's failures and weaknesses and still be one community with one another. I think that is something that I would love to see. So as we sing this song, I want us to ask the Lord to send His fresh wind to renew our mind, renew our heart, not just for ourselves, for the church, for your families, for your workplaces, so that you can go out there understanding your identity, your purpose, and live your lives well to the glory of God. So let's sing this song together.